Hi, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Thursday Thoughts. I'm Alex Leonida. I'm the CIO at Capital Financial Group in Colorado. Thank you guys again for joining me this week. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure that you do that so you don't miss any of our videos. We got a bunch of good content. Cole's been putting out some awesome financial planning topics recently. So jump on that. We got a lot of good stuff for you guys. Just a heads up, there is not going to be a Thursday Thoughts next week. We are actually going to drop our quarterly recap video. I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit on some macro investment strategies. So if you guys are into that sort of thing, that's going to be the video for you. All right. If you guys have any questions at all, shoot them over to info@cfgfinancialplanning.com. Come with the good stuff. I'm willing to answer pretty much anything on this show as long as it's suitable for the audience. So send over some questions if you guys get a chance. As always, today we are going to cover four major sections. We're going to go through important data. We're going to go through big news stories. We're going to take a question. And then I'm going to close with my personal favorite, which is the final thought. All right, so let's get rolling. Just like every week, we start with data points, and we're going to stay on the trend with talking about jobs. All right, there's a lot going on in the job space. The news is telling you one thing. We've talked over the last couple of weeks that the DOL report actually gives you the dirty details of what's going on. Here is the most updated chart on jobs. This week, we lost another 1.48 million jobs. Not as bad as the last week, but still way over the previous record before this whole coronavirus thing. And note the continuing claims did drop a little bit, marginally, I guess. But, dropping a little bit is better than nothing. Without explaining everything hiding in the DOL report again this week, I think it's really important to point out that the actual total unemployment rate increased by 700,000 to 30,553,817 people. As we've stated numerous times, the extra government cheese that we're seeing flying from helicopters and whatever, it's making it difficult for people to get back into the workforce. I mean, it just is what it is. There's some legislation coming out that's going to discuss expanding these programs, and we'll dive into that a little bit in our quarterly recap video. Give you guys a heads up on kind of what's on the horizon there. Next up, we're going to retouch on GDP again this week. I decided to frame this a little bit of a different way. I've been talking about GDP in terms of year over year change, et cetera, et cetera. This is our total aggregate GDP in one really, really unattractive chart. We started the year at 22 trillion and now we're at 18.5 trillion. This isn't a new number. This is just the third estimate because they like to give us a million different estimates every time that they report something. And it's saying that it's just a 5% decrease on a quarter over quarter basis, which sort of but it's a little bit more pronounced than that, I would personally argue. I'm going to actually dig into this in really, really deep detail in the quarterly review video. So definitely be on the lookout for that. The other important data point that we've been trying to touch on each month is home prices and home sales. And this week we had new home sales data come out, and we actually had a huge bump in May. It was massive. We had a 16.6% surge, which was actually the largest monthly increase on record. You see that gigantic drop that we had a couple of months ago, pretty aggressive. Obviously, people couldn't go see homes. Everybody was nervous, wasn't getting out of the house, etc. But there's been a massive recovery in this. I think something to point out that is kind of buried in the data, now that I'm not trusting the headline number, is where did all of these home buyers come from? And not surprisingly, at least to me, once I was able to find this information on page 11 of a 16-page document talking about this, 40%, there was a 40% increase in the Northeast. So, that was a hot spot for the virus, and people were going nowhere. So now that they're allowed to get out again, all that pent up demand for the last 12 weeks, give or take, all came to fruition this last month. So that's an important data point. And then also, we saw a huge bump in purchases in California as well. So it makes sense. They were some of the strictest, hardest hit areas. Well, I guess California wasn't, but that whole section is the West Coast. And this obviously started in Washington, and they were very, very strict on their lockdown orders trying to prevent the spread of the virus. So huge pent up demand, all coming out of the woodwork and buying in May. So that's what we got for data points this week. I didn't want to go into too much detail because we got a bunch of stuff coming in the quarterly recap video. Just wanted to flag housing because we've been touching on that every time a new piece of data point or a new piece of data drops. Next up on the list is big news. We have the same thing, right? We're going to talk about coronavirus, and we've been watching the trend change just a little bit. Rate of change, we were talking about it getting a little bit less bad. Well, that's not what we're looking at now. What we have here on the top is we have the daily case total. If you notice, we have a record. A lot of people are arguing at this point that we only have a record because there are a lot more tests being administered. So I decided to mix up this slide a little bit, and on the bottom, instead of hospitalizations, we now have tests administered per day. I was curious about this because I had a bias that I thought, hey, more tests, more cases, right? Well, we actually are somewhere around 100,000 less tests, or roughly 20%, give or take, less tests per day, short of our highest daily testing count. And it's kind of nuts because we've actually seen consecutive days with record case counts. So not only are we not administering as many tests as we were a few weeks ago or even a month ago, give or take, we also are seeing a much higher positivity rate. So I think that argument is kind of nullified at this point. Don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger type of scenario. But yeah, the number of tests per day, that's not the driving force behind how many cases we have. A couple of things I want to point out regarding this is total deaths per day is actually not that bad, relatively speaking. With the incubation period taking as long as it does, they were saying up to 2 weeks, but most people are 5 or 6 days. They don't require hospitalization until sometime after that in many instances. And then death is obviously another period of time after that. So if we don't see a huge increase in deaths in the next 2 weeks or so, then that's really saying that we're finding some way to treat this slightly better. And we're probably protecting the most vulnerable, or the most vulnerable aren't going out. A couple of states that I wanted to touch on. Texas, we're seeing enormous increases, and they're essentially out of ICU beds at this point in time, which is not good. They're actually stopping their reopening process, so we're gonna have to track that pretty carefully. But they are Texas, right? So they have a tendency to run more like a small country, I'd say, probably than most states do. So they do have emergency reserves of about 10 days worth of ICU beds, and they got a bunch of extra PPE and stuff in their stockpile. So they're at least somewhat prepared to deal with this, but I don't think they were really counting on the incredible case surge. California is kind of a different story. They're having a massive spike in cases as well, and they don't really have a bunch of extra reserve equipment. Frankly, I'm not sure what they're going to do. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like a legitimate another full scale lockdown in California. So that would be troubling for the economy. But all we can do is wait and see, right? And the market is basically getting to the point where it's starting to realize this, and we're starting to see volatility index levels creep up again, and we're starting to see stocks start to churn a little bit, and it's not all rainbows and roses out there in the stock market. So we're going to follow this real closely, and I'll keep you guys updated, and I'm going to touch on it in the video coming out in the next 10 days or so. All right, so we're going to move on to Europe. That's the next big news update. Nobody's really talking about Europe right now, but they have something that we've dealt with a bunch of times in the last couple of years. they finally have their own fiscal cliff scenario. Um, what I mean by that is most of the EU, by and large, did some form of stimulus, kind of like what we did here in the United States, trying to support businesses, try to encourage people to not lay off workers, et cetera. And almost all of the big programs are expiring. We're talking about France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy, and then the UK, which obviously isn't technically part of the EU anymore. They all have their programs expiring the next couple of weeks. They don't have funding or the credit facilities to deal with these kind of quite like the U.S. does. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch how they handle it. Although on the bright side, their caseload has not spiked nearly as bad as it has here in the United States. So there are some positives to take out of the whole thing, and people may get back to spending money, um, just depending on what happens. Last up on our news list this week is Congress, my favorite topic, right? These guys and gals. All right. Well, what did we get from them? A bunch of drama and hand wringing, people getting really mad, not doing a whole lot. That's what that cartoon was about. Let's look at it again. Love it. Yeah, I don't know. Um, Basically, here's the deal. They come back from their really long vacation because that's how they roll in Congress. They like big vacations, especially when there's a bunch of drama. And then the Senate tries to pass a police reform bill, and it doesn't work. Why? Um, because people say it's not extreme enough. From my perspective, I mean, I'm just trying to report the news here, but something's better than nothing, right? I mean, that's kind of what the country's uh, on fire and freaking out about is they need some kind of reform, and what we're getting right now is some kind of reform from the Senate. Um, but it's not even going to get a vote because it didn't get enough support. The House, as their response to this whole deal, is going to pass an extreme police reform bill, which obviously the Senate's not going to pass, right? And of course, President Trump wouldn't pass something that extreme with police anyway. So basically, we have no middle ground to stand on at this point. I mean, I'm not going to get into specifics on what I think is going to be enough or the right kind of bill because you guys don't really care what I think about that. But all I can say is it would be nice if we got a little bit of meaningful leadership out of Washington, especially right now with the country in crisis. Like, it'd be cool if they could just do something. All right. So that's it for the news. It's time for the question of the day. We have a pretty good one. I mean, we don't talk politics all that much on this channel, but I think this is pretty timely. Um, and the question reads like this: Alex, what do you think is going to happen to the markets during this election cycle? Well, that's a loaded question. Historically speaking, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do the question slide. My bad, guys. I'll get better. I'll get better at one of these days. Historically speaking, markets just don't care, right? They don't care if you have a Republican president, Democrat president. They don't care if the House is Republican or Senate's Democrat or whatever. All the market really cares about is predictability. If you're a client, you've heard me harp on this a million things. But the bottom line is if there's a divided Congress or if the president is of a different party than Congress, whatever, then there's going to be an absolute stalemate and nothing is going to get done. The market loves that. Okay. I don't know what's going to happen at all in this election. I mean, polling would suggest that Democrats are going to run away with this whole thing. But then again, polling looked in favor of the Democrats in 2016, right? So I don't know how much credence you can give the poll numbers, especially right now with things being totally nuts out there. Um, I mean, there's a lot of social and economic issues flaring, and nobody's really saying anything that's getting the voters going, if you know what I mean. What I do know is that if Trump gets reelected, we're going to see a pretty meaningful cut in spending at some point in the next couple of years, and that spending is going to come from a cut in social programs, maybe not our total budget, but social programs are going to get axed. We'll probably have or continue to have really attractive tax policy and pretty loose regulations on corporate America, which theoretically, historically, is good for business. If Biden gets elected, and Congress will probably switch with him if that actually occurs. Taxes and regulations are going to get much tighter, and businesses will generally struggle a little bit with that, especially with that level of change in the beginning, and profits are going to stagnate. But I think one potential positive would be, or at least economically speaking, would be an increase in spending on social programs, um, and pretty meaningful increase in budget across the board, which at some point in time is going to get spent, right? We've seen that with all the money going to people's pockets, flying from the skies right now. People are spending it. I mean, I don't care what the news is trying to tell you about people being scared to spend. That's not a real thing. We saw retail sales numbers last week going through the roof. That is not an accident with 30 million unemployed people, right? So people will spend. And who's to say bottom up economics won't work? I mean, I don't know if it will or it won't. We haven't seen full blown bottom up economics in modern times. So, I mean, anything can happen. But what I can say is volatility is going to be the star of the show on this, and markets are going to move, and they're going to move a lot because there's so many uncertainties right now in the marketplace, in the economy, and with our political landscape. All right, so here's my final thought. This is absolutely my favorite segment, and I got something positive today. All right, so if you guys remember, I don't know, about a month ago or whatever, we started talking about how sports are coming back, and they're an awesome distraction. They're something that's deeply ingrained in our culture that most of us care about one sport at least. My personal favorites, PGA Tour. Close second is Major League Baseball. Um, the PGA Tour has been back for a couple of weeks. There's been some awesome tournaments. So if you didn't notice, or you didn't see that pop up because you haven't been watching a lot of TV during quarantine and all that, there's awesome PGA Tour events every week now. Something to do. Take a good Sunday nap too. Next up is we are getting baseball back finally. The boys of summer are coming back into kind of early fall, whatever. Better late than never. They're going to do a 60-game season. It's going to look a little bit different this year. We're going to have a designated hitter in both leagues, which is crazy, like blasphemy in my opinion. But I think it's to protect the pitchers on a shortened schedule, and we know they're not athletes anyway. Yeah, so we're getting that. They are reporting to camp on July 1st, which is awesome. I was hoping that the season was going to start on the 4th of July. I thought that would have been really awesome for everybody. But we're going to have to wait till July 23rd. But the good news is it's right around the corner. I'm trying to think what else is with baseball right now. I don't know. It's awesome. 60-game season, playoffs. It's going to be cool. The players and the owners were in a brutal fight trying to figure out the terms of the deal. But the players were able to get prorated salaries, which I personally think makes sense for these guys because they work their butts off, and it's a lot of work. It's tough. It's a grind being away from your family. So it's good that they're getting their prorated salaries. Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think the timing is great on this, considering we all seem we all I don't know. The timing's great because we need something to be happy about around the 4th of July. I mean, this is a really, really challenging environment that we found ourselves in. With this holiday coming up, I want everybody to remember that we're all Americans. Um, we're all in this together, right? I mean, we're all struggling, and life isn't always easy. And this country was built on family units and small businesses with a combination of problem solving and grit. And we never give up as a country. I just want everybody to keep their heads held high. Um, Try to be positive, right? Keep supporting your family, your friends, your neighbors. Keep doing the right thing, and we're going to get through this, right? There's always light in the darkness. I appreciate you guys so much for watching these videos and the support I've been getting. I hope that you guys are getting something out of this. I love doing them for you. I wanted to I wanted to remind you guys to like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out the quarterly recap video that we have coming up. It's going to be awesome. We are going to get into the weeds. We're going to get into the really deep stuff, the macro strategies to kind of frame our investments, philosophy at Capital Financial Group. And I look forward to sharing it with you guys. So hopefully you guys have a wonderful 4th of July. Everybody stay safe, and cheers. If you're wondering, this is iced tea because it's like 100 degrees in my basement. So thanks, guys.